The Hall of Mockery. The Grand Hall of Varexon Prime was built to show power. The ceiling was so high that even large alien warlords looked small beneath it. Bright energy lights flowed along the walls like rivers of fire. Banners of conquered worlds hung from metal pillars. In the center of the hall stood a wide combat platform made of dark stone, polished smooth by years of challenges and duels. Tonight the hall was full. Alien warriors from many systems gathered in shining armor, and some had sharp claws, some had thick scales, others had glowing eyes and metal implants built into their bodies. They spoke loudly, laughing and placing bets. The reason for their excitement stood near the entrance. A human. He walked slowly across the floor, his boots echoing against the stone. His armor looked old. Scratches covered the chest plate. One shoulder guard was cracked. The metal was burned in several places, as if it had survived heavy explosions. The design was simple compared to the advanced alien battlesuits glowing around him. A tall alien with blue skin leaned toward his friend and laughed. "That is the famous human warrior? He looks like he survived a trash storm." Another alien with mechanical arms added, "His armor is outdated by at least 20 cycles. Does his species not upgrade?" The laughter spread across the chamber. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a raised throne of silver metal, the alien High Marshal watched quietly. He had invited this human after hearing stories from border worlds. Stories of a lone fighter who had ended pirate fleets and survived impossible missions. The Marshal expected something impressive. What he saw instead was a damaged suit and a silent man. The human reached the center platform and stopped. He stood straight, neither proud nor ashamed. He did not look around nervously. He did not react to the whispers. His helmet covered his face completely, hiding his expression. General Korvath, champion of the Varexon fleets, stepped forward from the crowd. He was large even by alien standards. His armor shone with layered shields and active energy fields. His voice boomed across the hall. "So this is the human they speak of," Korvath said loudly. "The one who defeated the Krath raiders." The human said nothing. Korvath circled him slowly. "Your armor is broken. Your plating is cracked. You walk into our hall wearing scrap metal?" More laughter echoed from the balconies. One alien shouted, "Maybe humans cannot afford real armor." Another said, "Be careful. The suit might fall apart before the fight begins." The High Marshal did not silence them. He wanted to see how the human would react under insult. Still, the human remained calm. Korvath stopped directly in front of him. "You were invited to prove your strength. Yet you arrive looking like a defeated soldier." For the first time, the human spoke. His voice came through the helmet speaker, steady and low. "I did not come here to impress you." The simple answer made some of the laughter fade, but others laughed louder. Korvath folded his arms. "Then why did you come, human?" "To end the question," the human replied. A quiet ripple moved through the hall. Korvath narrowed his glowing eyes. "What question?" The human's head tilted slightly. Whether humans are weak without machines." The alien champion smiled sharply. "You are weak with that machine." A wave of mocking cheers filled the chamber. The High Marshal leaned forward slightly, interested now. He had heard reports about humans relying heavily on technology. Their ships were powerful, their weapons were precise. Many believed their armor gave them their strength. Korvath raised his voice again. "Remove the armor, then. Show us what stands inside it." Several warriors shouted in agreement. "Yes, remove it. Let us see the fragile flesh. Without armor, he will beg." The human stood silent for a long moment. Then he raised one hand slowly toward his chest. The sound in the hall grew louder with excitement. Was he actually going to do it? Korvath laughed deeply. "You will not survive a single strike without that suit." The human's fingers touched the first lock seal on his chest plate. A small mechanical click echoed in the sudden silence. It was not loud, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Some of the laughter stopped. The human spoke again, his voice calm and clear. "You are laughing at the wrong thing." Another seal released with a heavy metallic sound. The chest plate loosened slightly. Korvath frowned for the first time. "Do you think removing your armor will make you frightening?" The human did not answer. Instead, he reached for the shoulder locks. It more clicking sounds. The chamber felt different now. The earlier laughter faded into tense whispers. Something about his calm movements did not match the humiliation expected of him. He was not angry. He was not rushed. He was controlled. The first armor plate dropped to the stone floor with a heavy crash. The echo filled the hall. It was thicker than expected, heavier, not light scrap metal. The alien scanners activated automatically, analyzing the exposed area beneath the plate. Then several officers checked their readings and looked confused. The human rolled his shoulders slightly, as if freeing himself from a burden. Korvath felt a small, unfamiliar sensation tighten in his chest. It was not fear, not yet. But it was no longer amusement. The human reached for the next lock, and the hall, once full of laughter, began to fall silent. The weight beneath the steel. The heavy chest plate hit the stone floor with a deep metallic echo that rolled across the grand hall of Varexon Prime. The sound did not fade quickly. It lingered, as if the hall itself understood that something had shifted. Warriors who had been laughing only moments before now stared closely at the exposed section of the human's body. What they expected to see was thin flesh, fragile bone, weakness hidden beneath technology. And what they saw instead did not match that image. The human's underlayer suit was not decorative. It was reinforced, woven with dark fibers that looked flexible yet strong. Beneath that thin material, his frame was solid. Not enormous, not monstrous, but dense. His shoulders were broad. His stance was balanced. Across his visible skin ran old scars, long lines, small circular burns, marks that told stories of battles survived. They were not fresh wounds. They were healed reminders. Alien scanners swept across him quietly. Data flashed across several tactical displays along the walls. Officers checked the readings twice. Muscle density was above average for his species. Bone structure reinforced beyond natural baseline. Neural activity stable. Heart rate slow and steady. There was no spike of fear, no stress surge. Even without full armor protection, his biological readings remained controlled. General Korvath noticed the silence building around him. He cleared his throat and forced a low laugh. "Scars do not make a warrior," he said loudly. "They only prove survival." The human's helmet tilted slightly toward him. "Yes," he answered calmly. "That is the point." Murmurs passed through the hall. The confidence in his tone did not sound like arrogance. It sounded factual. He reached up and unsealed the second shoulder lock. The damaged shoulder plate slid free and dropped beside the chest armor. The impact shook the floor again. This time, as a visible crack formed in the polished stone, several warriors exchanged uncertain looks. That plate had seemed thin and worn, yet it carried significant mass. Why would such weight be necessary? Korvath's eyes narrowed. "Heavy armor slows movement," he said. "You stand before faster opponents." The human slowly rotated his exposed shoulder as if testing freedom of motion. "Yes," he agreed. "It does." The words were simple, but their meaning unsettled more than one officer. If the armor slowed him, then why wear it at all? Princess observers in the upper gallery leaned forward in curiosity. Some of them had studied human battle tactics from recorded wars. Humans often used external technology to increase performance. Yet this warrior appeared to be removing limitation rather than losing protection. The human's gauntleted hands moved to the side clamps around his torso. Each release produced a mechanical hiss as internal pressure systems disengaged. A faint layer of steam escaped from beneath the plates. The suit had been regulating temperature tightly, more tightly than normal combat armor required. As the final torso section separated, the upper half of his armor fell away completely. Gasps replaced whispers. His frame was not exaggerated, but it was refined. Lean muscle ran across his arms and chest with the structure of someone trained for endurance rather than brute display. Embedded along his spine and ribs were subtle augmentation lines, small metallic nodes placed carefully beneath the skin. They were not external weapons. They were stabilizers and limiters. The alien scanners detected artificial neural dampeners that had been restraining reaction speed and force output. An officer near the front turned to his superior. "The readings show suppressed motor capability," he said quietly. The armor was limiting him. Korvath heard the words and stepped closer, unwilling to lose control of the moment. "Limiting you?" he demanded. "Why would a warrior weaken himself?" The human finally turned his helmet fully toward the alien champion. "Because strength without control is dangerous," he replied. A ripple of confusion spread. Aliens valued dominance openly. Power was displayed, not hidden. The idea of reducing one's own capability made little sense in their culture. The human reached for the lower torso locks next, and the metal around his waist disengaged with a deep internal click. As he stepped out of the remaining upper plating, several observers noticed something else. His movements were becoming smoother, more fluid. It was subtle, but visible. The weight he carried moments ago had been significant. The floor beneath his boots cracked slightly as he adjusted his stance. It was not a stomp. It was simply the shift of mass. Korvath felt something new this time. It was not doubt exactly, and it was calculation. His tactical instincts recognized danger patterns long before fear formed. The human's posture had changed from passive to ready, yet he had not raised a weapon. He simply stood with relaxed shoulders and steady breathing. "You stand unprotected in our hall," Korvath said, though his voice lacked earlier humor. "One strike would end you." The human reached up slowly to the final seal on his helmet. The hall grew quiet again. Even the distant hum of energy lights seemed softer. "Protection," the human said carefully, "is relative." The helmet locks disengaged one by one. A faint sound of shifting internal components echoed inside the chamber. The front visor lifted, then separated completely. When his face was revealed, it was not rage that looked back at them. It was focus. His eyes were clear and sharp. They moved calmly from warrior to warrior, measuring distances, angles, reactions. Only a thin scar crossed one side of his jaw. Another marked his eyebrow. None of them looked recent. Alien biometric scanners registered his pulse again. It remained steady. Korvath stepped back half a pace before correcting himself. The movement was small, but several in the hall noticed it. The human rolled his neck once, as if freeing stiffness. Without the armor, his height seemed slightly greater. Not physically taller, but more present. And the heavy plates on the floor around him were not signs of weakness. They were signs of restraint. "You asked to see what stands inside," the human said quietly. "This is all that ever mattered." The laughter that once filled the grand hall was completely gone now. Only silence remained, thick and heavy. The warriors who had mocked him moments ago were no longer smiling. They were analyzing. Korvath lifted his weapon slightly, more out of pride than strategy. "Then show us," he demanded. The human did not rush forward. He did not crouch into an attack stance. He simply shifted his weight and looked at the alien champion with calm certainty. "I am still holding back," he said. And for the first time since the human had entered the hall, the aliens began to understand that the broken armor had never been the weakness. The moment the laughter died, the words, "I am still holding back," did not echo loudly. Yet they carried across the grand hall with more force than any shouted challenge. The silence that followed was no longer curious silence. It was tense. Warriors who had arrived expecting entertainment now sensed that they were witnessing something far more serious. General Corvath adjusted his grip on his weapon, a long energy blade that shimmered with unstable power. He had defeated champions from 6 systems. His armor enhanced his strength and reaction speed beyond normal biological limits. Yet he had never been forced to question his advantage before. The human stood without armor, unarmed and calm. Corvath decided to break the stillness. He activated his blade fully, and the sharp hum of energized metal filled the hall. The glowing edge cast light across the human's exposed skin. "If you are holding back," Corvath said, forcing confidence into his tone, "then release it. Prove your words." Without waiting for further reply, Corvath lunged forward. His movement was fast, and faster than most species could visually track. The blade sliced through the air toward the human's shoulder in a clean, precise arc designed to disable, not kill. Many in the hall expected the human to dodge backward or attempt to retreat. He did not. Instead, he moved forward. The motion was almost invisible. One moment he stood still, and the next, he had stepped inside the arc of the blade. Corvath's strike cut through empty space. Before the alien could adjust, the human's hand closed around Corvath's armored wrist. The grip was firm but controlled. No bones cracked, no blood spilled. Yet Corvath's arm stopped instantly, as if caught by a machine clamp. The alien champion tried to pull free. His armor amplified his strength, sending power surges through his exosuit. The floor beneath them fractured slightly from the force. But the human did not strain. His muscles tightened just enough, and the scanners along the walls began registering spikes in controlled output from the neural nodes along his spine. The dampening systems that had restrained him earlier were no longer present. With a smooth twist, the human redirected Corvath's momentum. The massive alien lost balance and crashed onto the stone platform. The impact shook the hall. Gasps replaced steady breathing among the crowd. Corvath rolled quickly to his feet, stunned more by the efficiency of the move than by pain. You rely on predictable power," the human said evenly. "You swing wide because you believe your strength is enough." Corvath growled and attacked again, this time adjusting his angle. The blade flashed in rapid succession, testing the human's reaction time. Each strike met air or was redirected with minimal contact. The human did not counterattack aggressively. He stepped around each motion as though he had already seen the pattern before it began. His breathing remained steady. Then his eyes never lost focus. The High Marshal watched carefully from his throne. This was no wild exchange. It was calculated. The human was not overpowering Corvath. He was outthinking him. On the third engagement, the human moved differently. He allowed the blade to pass close to his side, close enough to burn fabric from his underlayer suit. The audience inhaled sharply, expecting injury. But the movement had purpose. In the same instant, the human struck precisely at a joint seam in Corvath's armor. The blow was not brutal. It was exact. A pulse of force disrupted the suit's balance regulators. Corvath staggered backward, his armor flickering as internal systems struggled to recalibrate. Several warriors in the hall activated their own weapons instinctively, not to attack, but in reaction. The sight of their champion, destabilized, created discomfort. The human turned his head slightly toward them. He did not look threatened. He looked aware. Corvath roared and charged again with full force, abandoning measured strikes. He aimed to overpower. The human waited half a second longer than before, drawing Corvath closer. Then he stepped forward once more and delivered a controlled strike to the alien's chest plating. The impact sound was deep and heavy. Corvath flew backward and slid across the platform before coming to rest near the edge. Silence filled the chamber completely. Korvath attempted to stand, but his armor's front systems were temporarily offline. The blow had not shattered the suit. It had disabled its central stabilizer. The human had struck at the exact point needed to interrupt function without destroying equipment or ending a life. The human did not advance further. He did not press his advantage. He remained standing where he had delivered the final strike, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady. "I came here because you questioned our strength," he said calmly, and loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "Strength is not noise. It is not size. It is not decoration." Korvath finally pushed himself upright, slower now, understanding written clearly across his features. He had not been overwhelmed by rage or brute force. He had been studied and neutralized. The alien scanners along the walls displayed updated readings. The human's output had peaked only briefly during each exchange, never exceeding safe biological thresholds. And he had not released full potential. He had measured every movement carefully. The High Marshal rose from his throne. His presence commanded attention instantly. The warriors lowered their weapons, though tension still lingered in the air. "You fought without killing," the Marshal observed. "You fought without anger." The human turned toward him. "Anger wastes energy," he replied. "Control preserves it." The Marshal looked at the broken armor plates scattered across the floor and then back at the unarmored warrior. "Why wear such weight if you do not need it?" he asked. The human's eyes moved briefly across the hall of warriors who had mocked him earlier. "Because sometimes," he answered quietly, "others feel safer when they believe you are weaker." The meaning settled heavily among the crowd. The damaged armor had not been a symbol of weakness, and it had been a shield for everyone else in the room. Korvath stepped forward once more, slower now, his pride wounded, but his understanding sharper. "You could have ended me," he admitted. "Yes," the human replied without arrogance, "but that was never the purpose." The hall remained silent, but the silence was no longer filled with ridicule. It was filled with respect, mixed with caution. The human had not raised his voice. He had not displayed cruelty. He had simply demonstrated ability. And in that demonstration, the laughter that once filled the grand hall of Varexon Prime did not return. What the armor was really for the grand hall remained silent long after General Korvath stepped back into formation. No one rushed forward to challenge the human again. The broken armor plates scattered across the stone floor no longer looked like signs of weakness. They looked like heavy chains that had just been removed. The High Marshal descended slowly from his throne, that his long silver cloak flowing behind him. He studied the human carefully, not as a curiosity now, but as a factor that could change balance across systems. "You entered my hall and accepted insult," the Marshal said in a calm, controlled voice. "You allowed mockery. You allowed challenge. You removed your armor instead of defending your pride. Why?" The human did not answer immediately. He looked around the chamber at the warriors who had laughed, at the balconies filled with officers and observers, at the cracks in the stone where his armor had fallen. His expression remained steady. "Because pride starts wars," he replied, "and I did not come here to start one." The Marshal's eyes narrowed slightly. "You came to end a question." "Yes," the human confirmed. A quiet murmur spread again through the chamber. The earlier message was becoming clear. The gathering had been organized to test human capability. Rumors from outer territories suggested that human soldiers could operate without advanced suits for extended periods, that their training focused on mind and body rather than full technological dependency. Many in the Empire believed those rumors were exaggerated. Now they were seeing proof. The Marshal gestured toward the armor pieces on the floor. "Explain it," he demanded. "What was that armor?" The human bent down slowly, and lifted one of the cracked shoulder plates. Even in his bare hands, the metal looked dense and heavy. He held it up slightly so the nearest officers could see. "Restraint armor," he said simply. Several officers exchanged confused glances. One stepped forward cautiously. "Restraint?" The human nodded once. "Your scanners already confirmed it. Neural dampeners, motor limiters, output stabilizers. It reduces strength, slows reaction speed, lowers impact force." The marshal's voice carried disbelief. "You weakened yourself intentionally." "Yes." "Why would a warrior do such a thing?" The human placed the shoulder plate back down carefully instead of dropping it. "Because most species react badly when they feel threatened," he said calmly. "When they see a human at full capability, they prepare for violence. That creates violence." A few alien officers shifted uncomfortably. The statement was not accusation. It was observation. The human continued, his tone steady and measured. "Your empire values dominance. You test strength openly. You believe power must be visible to be respected. Humans learned something different. When power is visible, it creates fear. When fear grows, conflict follows." The marshal folded his hands behind his back, processing the explanation. "And yet, you removed it." "Yes," the human said quietly, "because you needed to understand." There was no arrogance in his voice, no challenge, just clarity. General Korvath finally spoke again, slower now, pride replaced by thought. "You entered knowing we would mock you." "Yes." "And you accepted it." "Yes." Korvath looked down at his own damaged armor seam where the human's precise strike had disrupted his systems. "You could have responded with force the moment the first insult was spoken." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" The human met his gaze. "Because strength that reacts to every insult is not strength. It is insecurity." The words were simple, but they struck deeper than any physical blow. Several younger warriors lowered their eyes slightly. The earlier laughter felt distant and foolish now. The marshal began walking slowly in a circle around the human, studying him from every angle. Without armor, the human looked smaller than many in the chamber, yet the sense of pressure around him felt greater. The marshal understood what his scanners were confirming. The armor had not been compensating for weakness. It had been controlling excess. "Your species grows dangerous," the marshal said thoughtfully. "You fight without anger. You restrain without fear. That balance is rare." The human did not smile. "It was not always balanced," he admitted. "We learned." The chamber quieted again at those two words. We learned. That was the difference. Many species achieved power through natural advantage or inherited technology. Humans achieved it through repeated survival. The marshal stopped directly in front of him. "If you wear restraint armor among us," he said slowly, "does that mean you do not trust yourself?" The human considered the question. "It means I respect consequences." That answer lingered in the air. He turned slightly and looked up toward the balconies where younger officers watched carefully. "You saw damaged armor and assumed weakness," he continued. "You saw outdated design and assumed inferiority. But that assumption would have cost you more than pride if this were a battlefield." Korvath's jaw tightened, not from anger, but from acknowledgement. The marshal finally raised his voice so all could hear clearly. "You did not defeat my champion," he declared. "You demonstrated control. That is different." The human inclined his head slightly in agreement. "Correct." "And what do humans seek now?" the marshal asked. The human answered without hesitation. "It's our recognition." The hall remained silent as the weight of that word settled. Not territory, not tribute, not submission. Recognition. The marshal looked across his gathered warriors and then back at the human standing calmly among broken plates of steel. "You have it," he said at last. A quiet shift moved through the chamber. It was not applause. It was not cheering. It was something deeper. The laughter that had filled the hall at the beginning of the night felt distant and childish now. In its place was understanding. The human bent down and began calmly collecting his armor pieces, not rushing, not embarrassed. As he lifted each heavy plate, the cracks in the floor seemed smaller than before. The damage had not been physical alone. It had been cultural. Before placing his helmet back on, he looked once more at the gathered warriors. "Do not mistake restraint for weakness," he said softly. Then he secured the helmet and locked the first seal. The sound echoed clearly in the silent hall, and no one laughed. The reason he came. The grand hall of Varexon Prime did not return to its earlier noise. Even as the human calmly reattached sections of his armor, the atmosphere remained controlled and thoughtful. Warriors who once whispered insults now watched in silence. The cracked stone beneath the heavy plates served as quiet proof that what they had witnessed was not a performance, but a lesson. And the High Marshal remained standing at the center platform, his authority steady, but his perspective clearly changed. He no longer saw a curiosity from a distant species. He saw a calculated representative of a civilization that had evolved beyond simple strength. When the human secured the final chest lock and the faint mechanical seals engaged, the marshal spoke again. "You have shown restraint. You have shown discipline. But demonstrations do not happen without reason. Why did you accept this invitation?" The human's helmet tilted slightly toward him. "Because rumors spread faster than truth," he replied calmly. "Your border fleets have been increasing patrol activity near human systems. Trade vessels report interception. Smaller species speak of possible expansion." The marshal did not interrupt, but several officers shifted uneasily. The reports were accurate. The Empire had begun quiet movements near outer human territories, not open aggression, but pressure, testing, measuring. "We remember what happened the last time pressure became invasion," the human continued. "We rebuilt after that conflict. We improved. We do not seek war, but we will not allow misunderstanding to grow again." The meaning was clear. The visit was not about pride. It was about prevention. General Korvath stepped forward, his earlier confidence replaced with seriousness. "You could have sent a fleet to send this message," he said. Why come alone?" The human answered without hesitation. "Because fleets create panic. Panic creates war. One warrior creates conversation." The simplicity of that answer carried weight. The Empire understood escalation. The arrival of a fleet would have triggered automatic response protocols. Ships would mobilize. Defensive grids would activate. A chain reaction would begin. But one warrior stepping into the heart of their capital, accepting insult, and demonstrating controlled superiority, that forced reflection instead of retaliation. The High Marshal walked slowly toward the edge of the platform and looked out across the hall filled with his commanders. "You risked death," he said. "You stood in a chamber where hundreds could have attacked at once." "Yes," the human agreed calmly, "but I calculated the probability." The marshal allowed a faint, almost amused expression. "Miss, you calculated that we would not act dishonorably?" "I calculated that leaders who seek long-term power prefer stability over pride." The statement did not insult. It challenged intelligently. The marshal understood the respect embedded within it. The human had not come blindly. He had studied Varexon culture. He had learned how its leadership functioned. This was not courage built on emotion. It was courage built on preparation. Several officers exchanged low comments among themselves. The Empire had always believed that humans relied heavily on machines and numbers. Yet this warrior had displayed strategic awareness without technological advantage in the moment. His greatest weapon had been information. Korvath looked at the armor pieces now secured once more around the human's frame. "And if we had chosen pride instead?" he asked. The human paused for only a fraction of a second. "Then this hall would look different." The words were not spoken loudly, yet they froze the air. The meaning was obvious without detail. The human had not shown his full ability earlier. He had demonstrated only enough to prove a point. The silence confirmed that everyone understood. The marshal stepped closer again, lowering his voice slightly, though it still carried through the chamber. "You claim humans do not seek dominance." "That is correct. But you clearly possess power." "Yes." "Then what do humans seek?" The human's response came steady and without delay. "Survival with respect." The answer felt strangely balanced. Not submission, not conquest. Survival with respect. It was a position that did not demand weakness from others, yet it did not allow weakness toward itself. The marshal considered this carefully. The Xylar Empire expanded because expansion brought resources and security. But expansion also created enemies. Humanity, by contrast, had grown through defense and adaptation. That made their stability harder to shake. "You have our attention," the marshal said finally. "What assurance do you require?" The human looked around the hall once more, as if ensuring every officer heard his next words clearly. "Pull back the border patrol pressure. Open direct communication channels. Let small systems trade freely without fear of interference. That is all." It was not an unreasonable request. It was not even a loss of territory. It was a reduction of tension. Korvath folded his arms thoughtfully. "And if we agree?" "Then humans remain neighbors," the human answered calmly. "Not enemies." The marshal nodded slowly. He understood the value of neighbors over enemies, especially ones who evolved rapidly. He turned to his council officers. "Prepare adjustment orders for outer fleet positioning," he commanded. "Suspend aggressive probing along human routes. Initiate diplomatic channels." There was no protest, no challenge. What had begun as mockery had ended in policy change. The human inclined his head slightly. "That is sufficient." As he turned to leave the platform, the marshal spoke once more. "You walked into our hall wearing broken armor. You allowed laughter. You removed your limits. You restored them. And you leave without demanding tribute." The human stopped briefly. "We do not need tribute," he said quietly. "We need understanding." He stepped down from the platform and began walking toward the exit doors of the grand hall. The sound of his boots against stone was steady and unhurried. No one blocked his path. No one spoke insult. Warriors moved aside respectfully. The laughter from earlier in the evening felt like something that had happened years ago instead of moments. As the massive doors opened and the human passed through, the hall remained silent. The broken cracks in the floor were still visible, but they were no longer marks of humiliation. They were reminders. The High Marshal looked across his commanders and spoke softly, almost to himself. "We saw damaged armor," he said. "What we should have seen was restraint." No one disagreed, and somewhere beyond the walls of Varexon Prime, humanity continued to grow, not louder, not larger, but stronger in ways that could not be measured by laughter. After the doors closed, when the massive doors of the grand hall sealed behind the human warrior, the sound echoed through the chamber like the final note of a long argument. No one spoke immediately. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was reflective. Warriors who had once leaned against pillars in amusement now stood upright, thinking carefully about what they had witnessed. The broken cracks in the stone platform had become symbols, not of damage, but of a shift in understanding. High Marshal Varex remained near the center of the platform long after the human departed. He studied the lines in the stone floor and then looked up toward his commanders. "We have misjudged them," he said plainly. There was no anger in his tone, No frustration, only recognition. We measured them by our standards. We assumed their reliance on technology meant weakness. What we saw today proves the opposite. General Korvath stepped forward, his armor partially repaired, but still marked by the precise strike that had disabled his stabilizer earlier. His pride was no longer bruised. It was sharpened. He could have ended me, Korvath admitted openly. Not by overpowering, but by precision. He chose not to. Several younger officers exchanged glances. In their culture, leaving an opponent alive after such a demonstration could have been seen as hesitation. But today, they understood it differently. It had not been hesitation. It had been control. Marshal Varex turned toward the strategic council positioned along the chamber walls. Humans wear restraint when diplomacy is required, he continued thoughtfully. That means they do not rely on fear to maintain balance. They rely on growth. He paused briefly, allowing the statement to settle. Species that grow through defeat are the most dangerous to provoke. An intelligence officer activated a nearby display, projecting recent data on human expansion. Trade routes had indeed increased. Research alliances with minor systems had strengthened. Human ships were appearing more frequently in sectors once considered too unstable. Yet none of these actions were aggressive. They were patient, calculated, structured. They adapt, the officer said quietly. Every conflict we have observed ends with them changing their tactics. They absorb loss and return improved. Korvath folded his arms, this time not as a gesture of challenge, but of analysis. Then open war would not eliminate the threat, he concluded. It would accelerate their development. The marshal nodded slowly. Exactly. Across the hall, some warriors began to understand the larger implication. The human who walked into their capital alone had not done so out of pride. He had done so because he knew his species no longer needed to shout to be heard. Their strength had matured beyond noise. Meanwhile, outside the hall and far from the political chamber, the human warrior walked calmly through the illuminated corridors of Varexon Prime's administrative district. His armor was secured once again, heavy plates locking into place with quiet mechanical clicks. The restraint systems had reactivated, subtly reducing his reflex speed and output force. And his movements appeared ordinary once more. He did not rush. He did not look back. As he stepped into the cold air of the capital's outer landing platform, a small human shuttle waited silently. The pilot, another human dressed in simple uniform attire, glanced at him as he approached. "How did it go?" the pilot asked calmly. "Productive," the warrior replied. The pilot studied the faint cracks still visible across the armor plating. "Any issues?" "Only pride," the warrior answered. And they boarded the shuttle without further discussion. As the engines powered up, the warrior removed his helmet and stared out at the massive skyline of alien architecture glowing under distant stars. His face showed no excitement, no triumph, only reflection. He understood the cost of what had happened inside that hall. Demonstrations like this were not for glory. They were investments in stability. Humanity had learned long ago that survival was not guaranteed by winning every battle. It was guaranteed by preventing the wrong battles from starting. Back inside the Grand Hall, Marshal Varex issued quiet directives to his council. Border fleets were to reduce pressure along human trade routes. Surveillance was to continue, but without provocation. Diplomatic envoys would be prepared for future contact. None of these actions were signs of weakness. They were signs of adaptation. Korvath approached the marshal once more after most of the council dispersed. "You trusted him," Korvath observed. "I trusted his restraint," Varex corrected. "And if one day they choose not to restrain themselves?" Korvath asked carefully. The marshal looked toward the cracked platform and then at the closed doors through which the human had exited. Then it will be because we forced that choice, he said quietly. And that would be our failure. The shuttle carrying the human warrior lifted from Varexon Prime's surface and disappeared into the dark sky above. No alarms followed, no fleets mobilized, no defensive systems engaged. The message had been delivered and understood. In distant human territories, reports would soon confirm that border pressure from the Xylar Empire had eased. Trade routes would stabilize. Smaller systems would breathe easier. None of them would know that the shift began not with a fleet engagement or a treaty summit, but with a single warrior allowing himself to be mocked before removing his limits. The broken armor had never represented weakness. It had been proof that humanity had grown strong enough to choose peace without appearing defenseless. And that choice was more powerful than any weapon displayed in the Grand Hall that night. As the stars stretched into lines around the departing shuttle, the human warrior closed his eyes briefly. The mission was complete. The message was simple. Humans did not need to roar to be respected. They only needed to stand. I remove the limits when necessary and remind the galaxy that restraint was a decision, not a weakness. The silence that remained. Long after the human shuttle vanished into the dark sky of Varexon Prime, the Grand Hall did not return to its old rhythm. The cracks in the stone platform were repaired quickly by maintenance drones, but the deeper mark left on the Empire could not be sealed so easily. Now warriors who once measured worth by brightness of armor and size of weapons now carried a different image in their minds, the image of a single human standing unarmored, calm, and completely in control. High Marshal Varex convened a private session with his senior commanders the following cycle. The tone of the meeting was not defensive, nor was it celebratory. It was analytical. Data streams filled the chamber walls, human military reports, technological growth charts, diplomatic expansion records. Every graph showed the same pattern. Humanity did not grow in sudden bursts. It grew steadily after every hardship. Each conflict was followed by improvement. Each loss was followed by adaptation. General Korvath stood beside the central display, watching footage recorded from the duel. The slow-motion replay showed the exact moment the human stepped inside his strike arc. The movement was precise, minimal, efficient. Korvath replayed it several times. He was not searching for weakness anymore. He was studying discipline. "We focused on their armor," Korvath said quietly. "We assumed their machines were their advantage." Marshal Varex nodded. "And they assumed we would assume that." The realization hung heavily in the room. The human had not only demonstrated physical control, he had demonstrated psychological understanding. He had predicted the Empire's reaction and used it as part of his message. Outside the council chamber, a word of the encounter spread across Varexon Prime. Young cadets trained differently that week. Instead of focusing only on offensive drills, instructors began emphasizing restraint protocols and adaptive strategy. The Empire had always valued strength, but now it began examining the discipline behind it. The encounter had not weakened Imperial pride. It had refined it. In distant human space, the warrior who had entered the Hall of Mockery filed his final report to command. Then it was short and factual. Border pressure reduced, diplomatic channels open, no escalation. He did not describe the laughter or the duel in detail. Those elements were not the purpose. The objective had been deterrence without destruction. His commanding officer reviewed the report and nodded in approval. "You could have shown more," the officer said during their brief, secure call. "Yes," the warrior replied. "And you chose not to." "Yes." There was no need for further explanation. Humanity's strategy had evolved beyond proving superiority through devastation. The galaxy was filled with species capable of war. True strength now lay in preventing unnecessary conflict while ensuring survival remained unquestioned. Back on Varexon Prime, Marshal Varex stood alone on a balcony overlooking the capital skyline. The city lights shimmered beneath him like distant stars. He replayed the human's final words in his mind. Do not mistake restraint for weakness. The statement carried a lesson not only about humans, but about leadership itself. The Empire had always relied on visible dominance. Large fleets, public victories, intimidating displays. But the human had demonstrated a different kind of dominance, quiet capability combined with deliberate limitation. That kind of power was harder to challenge because it did not need constant display. De Corvath joined the marshal on the balcony after a moment. He stood silently beside him. If they continue to grow like this, Corvath said thoughtfully, one day they may equal us. The marshal did not look concerned. Then we will adapt as well, he replied. Or we will fall. That is the law of the stars. Corvath nodded slowly. For the first time, the idea did not threaten him. It motivated him. Weeks passed, and border tensions steadily decreased. The trade between minor systems and human territories flourished. Reports from outer sectors confirmed something subtle, yet important. Other species began speaking differently about humanity, not as reckless expansionists, not as machine-dependent warriors, but as disciplined protectors of their own existence. The story of the broken armor traveled across the stars. Some exaggerated it, some misunderstood it, but the core message remained consistent. A human warrior walked into a hall of laughter and left behind silence. On a quiet training field far from any capital city, the human warrior removed his armor once more, not for diplomacy this time, but for practice. The restraint systems powered down, and he moved through combat drills with precise efficiency. Every strike was controlled, every motion measured. He did not train to destroy. He trained to end fights before they became wars. And he paused after completing a sequence and looked up at the sky. The galaxy remained vast, unpredictable, filled with ambition and fear. Humanity would continue to face challenges. There would be species who tested them again. There would be moments where restraint might be mistaken for weakness once more. But now the message had been delivered clearly. Strength did not need to shout. It did not need bright armor or loud threats. Sometimes, but the greatest show of power was allowing others to laugh until they understood. And somewhere in the records of the Xylar Empire, a single encounter was archived under a new classification. Not a duel, not a threat, not a humiliation, a lesson. They had mocked his broken armor, but what remained in the grand hall long after he left was not laughter. It was respect.